You landed on this video because you are confused while editing your photos on your mobile or your laptop. Well, you're in the right place. Here, we'll be talking about how to take good photos with the right settings. And then, what are these bars, these lines? What does contrast, exposure, saturation, all these terms mean when editing a photo? So, I'll break it down. We'll go in depth. I'll simplify it for you. So, without wasting any more time, let's dive right into it. Hey guys, Future Raghav here. While editing this video, I figured the people who are doing photography on their mobile won't have much use of chapter 1 because they are camera settings. So you can directly skip to the end of chapter 1. So yeah, enjoy. Before we even open an editing app, let's talk about how to take a better photo from the start. This all comes down to one thing called the exposure triangle. And think of it as a recipe of the right balance of three ingredients. The ingredients being aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So we'll go into them in depth one by one. Let's take an example, very simple example of your eyes. When you are in a bright environment, your eyes tends to close more, so you take lesser light. And when you are, roaming in a dark room, you tend to open your eyes wider to take in more light. So that's how aperture works exactly for the lens. So the wider you have your aperture open, the more light you can take in. And similarly, this is a property of a lens that it will blur off the background the l- wider you open. So the number is inversely proportional. Inversely proportional meaning if you increase this number, aperture will get smaller and smaller. So the number gets bigger, the aperture gets smaller. So they are inversely related. That's why it's upon a fraction. So 1.4 is basically your background is fully blurred and your subject is very crystal clear here. Mostly used in portrait photos. You'll see that a lot. And if you absolutely close your shutter like F by 22, you can see all the things very clearly. Even the background is clear, the subject is clear. And there will be a bit lesser light. So what happens is you have to balance it with ISO and shutter as well. So we'll get to that in a moment. Next is shutter speed. So shutter speed is basically how many seconds the shutter is open. So a fast shutter is a 1 by 1000 seconds. So your shutter is opening for that tiny bit of seconds. So it will capture the moment very precisely. It will have a very sharp image, very sharp details to it. And mostly my rule of thumb is when you're clicking photos outside, it's usually 1 by maybe 200. It's like the sweet spot in which you click photos. But it varies, you can have your own opinion about it. And slow shutter. You might have seen like a lot of photos where there are stars, just making a lot of lines. So what happens basically is your shutter is open for a whole 2 seconds and it will capture all the light which is there. So if the tail light is moving, it will capture the tail light moving. So that's why it creates this effect. It's very creative to, use it in certain situations. But yeah, that's how shutter speed works. And finally, we come to ISO. I think this is the most important here because it controls how sensitive your camera is to light. It basically means like if you have a lower ISO, your sensor will not be that receptive to light. It will use the light around that. So, for example, my camera right now is at around 400 to ISO. I have one light here, I have one light here. So I'm using these lights as a source to my camera sensor so that you can see me clearly. That's how it works. And if I turn off all these lights, I'll have to increase my ISO to, maybe 1600, 3200. Some cameras have a lot more than that. So it depends on what your camera has or what potential does your phone have to go to. And I would recommend like don't go, above 1600 or 3200 because gives a lot of visible gray. So let's dive in right into the example. Before that, I want to discuss a few things. There's some terms I'll be using, so I want to pre-explain them right now. So we discussed the exposure triangle, what controls the exposure, but what is exposure exactly? So exposure is basically how bright or how dark your image is. For example, this image is underexposed, like it's not completely, you cannot see the full details right here. And if I just crank up my exposure, this is overexposed. Like you can see the details are getting white and you are losing a lot of those details in the overexposure. So in any photo, we start by, balancing the exposure. Obviously, you're not perfect. Sometimes you get the underexposed image as well. Like this was in Ellora Caves. The cave had no lighting at all, just one beam of light hitting the statue. So I had to crank up my ISO a lot. So if I look into the metadata, you can see the exposure is 6400. So yeah, I know I said before that there's a sweet spot, but I had to go here because I could not have captured all the details in this. And again, 1/100 because I had to take in more light. F5.6, you know, it's not that good. You can go till 3.5. In if you have a kit lens, you can go to 3.5. You can see my focal length was 67 mm. So we'll first start by adjusting the exposure on. There's no right and wrong in this. It's just, how you develop your taste, your eye into seeing a perfect lighting, the perfect colors. So that will happen eventually with time. So let's just start. So what I go for is, if this is my main subject, if that has, a bit of overexposed part, I just go like two or three ticks down. So for example, I have this. So this is a bit overexposed. I don't want to go for this. So I'll just go to 2.1. So you can see before and after. Just adjusting the exposure as got out all these details in this photo. So next is highlight and shadows. So what's highlight and what's shadow? As the name suggests, highlight is the higher light part, the part which has more light, and shadow is shadow. We all know that. So if I crank up the highlights, you can see the difference is not much, but if I just reset it, you can see the highlight part is, getting a bit more highlighted. If I crank up the shadows, you can see the ISO grains here right now. We don't want to show this. If you want to show this, you can. I prefer not to do this because, it kind of ruins the vibe of this photo specifically. So I just, maybe go down a bit and I just go for this look where the light is just falling on the face of the statue. Obviously, you can go for this as well, where there's this rocky look. That totally depends on what your creative decision is at that point. So let's move let's move on to white and black. That's very straightforward. It will increase the whites or the blacks. If I reduce the whites, there's no visible whites in this photo, so you won't see the difference. But for blacks, you can see if I reduce the black, you create this, very focused look on this. If I just, show all the blacks, you can see these grains are what for the ISO grains. So I just like to go for this kind of look. You can see the shadow here is really nice and it's giving the structure to the face. And next is contrast. So we learned about highlight, we learned about shadows. So the difference between them is contrast. If you increase the contrast, the distance will increase between them. If you reduce the contrast, the distance will decrease between them. What do I mean by that? Let's see. So if I reduce the contrast, you can see the image is a bit flatter now and the highlights is moving closer towards the shadows. And if I just, crank up the contrast, You can see they're moving apart now. What do I mean by moving apart? I'll show you right here. I'll just move my camera this side. You can see this graph, right? This is a histogram of the light levels here. So if I just reset it, you can see the image has, more light towards the center, like it's perfectly balanced. And here you can see on the left side, there's shadows. So it's a good image. But when you want a great image, you don't have to focus too much on the center right here. This is not a good practice. It makes the image a very 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 flat. So we have to go for a bit more contrast. We have to make the image even, and we have to preserve the details as well. Now let's move on to saturation. Saturation is basically how saturated your colors are, and what's the intensity of those colors. So right now you can see I have zero saturation in this image. I want it to be a black and white image because I don't want any colors distracting the viewers. If I just crank up the saturation, you can see the details of the stone are coming out because it was old, it was aged. So you can see all the purple here, all the grains are coming out. I don't want that. I just want a clean black and white slate. I'll give you another example. In this photo, I have not done any changes. You can see there's yellow, there's a lot of colors in this image. If I just, you know, bring down the saturation to -100, it will create a black and white photo. So that's how you simply create a black and white photo. Just have zero saturation in your image. And if I just, increase the saturation, you can see the colors are very poppy. They're bringing out the depth. It's popping out. So you can use saturation in this way as well. So, yeah, this is after the contrast. This is before. We had a very, very dark image, and now we have a perfectly balanced image. Now you can go towards color grading and, maybe tweaking the colors as you like. So, a pro tip for the ones who stay till the end: always, always, always shoot in RAW whenever you can. If you have a storage issue, please upgrade your storage and always shoot in RAW, because you will have much more details that you can work on. You have much more flexibility on which you can work on. So yeah, thank you guys for watching till the end, and see you in the next one. Bye.